Hello, Tummy and Coos fans. It is me, Candace, here for another author event. I am really excited today to have M.A. Carrick, the author of A Mask of Mirrors, and that is actually two people. And they will be in conversation with Bryan Camp. So I'm very excited to have all of these folks here today. M.A. Carrick is the joint pen name of Marie Brennan and Alyc Helms, and they met in 2000 on an archaeological dig in Wales and Ireland, which I think is really cool. And they did a stint in the town of Carrickmacross, which is where the name came from. And they've built their friendship through 2 decades of anthropology, writing, and gaming. And they live in the San Francisco Bay Area and wrote A Mask of Mirrors. So it's really exciting. If you want their full bios, I have them on the website under this event, so you can go read all about both of them there. They will be in conversation today with Bryan Camp, who is a local author. He wrote The City of Lost Fortunes, which I know a lot of you have read. He is a graduate of Clarion West Writers Workshop, where I believe that is where Bryan and Alyc met, if I am not mistaken. And he also did the UNO Low Residency MFA program. His first novel, City of Fortunes, he started in the backseat of his parents' car as they evacuated for Hurricane Katrina, which is always a fun story as well. And Bryan has done a lot of things. He's been a security guard at a stock car at a racetrack. He's been a printer in a flag factory, an office worker in an oil refinery, a high school English teacher, and a writer. And so he lives here in New Orleans, and he's got cats. And one of them is named after a superhero. And we always talk about that. But you can always go back and watch old things with Bryan. But welcome. Thank you all so much for being here today.
It's good to be here.
Hello.
Good to be
I'm
here.
going to turn it over to Bryan, our MC.
So I have a number of questions that I am really eager to get to. But first, I believe we have a little bit of a reading.
Yes. Yeah, I've got a little bit that is from early on in The Mask of Mirrors. It's just going to be about 4 or 5 minutes. And the context you need here is that our main character, Wren, is a half-Versinian woman pretending to be a foreign noblewoman. And she has just gone slumming with some of the other nobility in the city in the neighborhood that she actually grew up in, where they have been, well, they have encountered, not quite so much been attacked by, a vigilante known as the Rook. Before she could think the better of it, Renata stepped forward. Her shoe came down on the blade of Metzen's sword, just as the Rook crouched to pick it up. As I understand it, Alton Metzen gave that actor a chance to defend himself in an honorable duel, she said. Surely you can do no less. The Rook straightened slowly. Even close enough to touch, she could make out almost nothing through the darkness of his hood. The deeper shadows of his eyes, the line of his jaw, like the stars she saw more when she didn't look directly. Then a glimmer of a smile came into view. Though she couldn't see his eyes, she felt him assessing her, as surely as she was assessing him. The Rook said, I could do less, or a good deal more. Their audience was growing as people crowded to watch the scene, but his murmur was for her alone. Then it lifted up with mockery for everyone to hear. But if I'm to play at noble games, shouldn't I get a noble's reward for my trouble? She bent to pick up the sword, letting it dangle from her gloved fingers. What sort of reward could a man like you want? It took every ounce of deceit she possessed to make the question sound dismissive. What mask have I offended, meeting the Rook as a noblewoman? A man like me wants for little. The hood dipped to the sword in her hand, then rose once more. But as there's such a treasure, I'll take the Alta's gloves. Her fingers tightened on the sword's hilt as the onlookers gasped. Most of those watching were common Nedejrans who cared little for Leganti ways. A few of them laughed. The nobles didn't. People of quality were not properly dressed in public without their gloves. By their lights, the Rook might as well have demanded she strip. A fair duel, Renata said, wrapping her hand carefully around the blade so she could offer the sword hilt first. And if you win, then a single glove. Her tone implied doubt. Inwardly she prayed, I hope you're as good as the stories say. Agreed. The Rook took the hilt, sliding the flat of the blade along her palm like he meant to cut his prize away early. I trust you'll remind me of the rules if I stray. You nobles make simple things so complicated. Flipping the blade, he tossed it to Metzen and drew his own. Metzen caught it, his previous swagger returning. I'm more than able to school muck-fucking scum like you. Don't worry, Alta Renata. I'll hand you his hood when I cut it off. The rook murmured. She can make gloves out of it. Uniat. His blade swept down and up to a high stance as he spoke the opening challenge. Metzen's grin slipped. The rook might claim ignorance of noble rules, but he knew the proper terms and forms for dueling. Tuat, Metzen spat in answer to the rook's challenge, and barely finished cutting his own salute before he attacked. Within 2 heartbeats, Wren knew she hadn't gambled foolishly. The rook dropped immediately from the straight-armed Leganti stance into the lower Versenian one, and met Metzen's charge without flinching, parrying the nobleman's thrusts with a few quick angles of his wrist. And he respected the rules of the game, passing up an opportunity to stomp on the arch of Metzen's foot, the way Wren would have done in his place. But she was a former river rat, and he was the rook. He could be brutal when necessary, but it was his flair that won him the hearts of the common folk. He danced out of the path of Metzen's thrusts with a little lace step, and when Metzen made the mistake of rushing him, the rook stepped in to meet it, locking them body to body in a brief circling waltz. Only a swift tilt of his head prevented Metzen's spit from flying into his hood, and he let go just in time to avoid an elbow to the jaw. The hood turned toward Wren. Remind me, Alta, are elbows permitted? They are not, she said, suppressing a laugh. I thought not. The tip of his blade rapped Metzen's arm hard, right where the nerve ran between skin and bone. Mind your manners, boy. The blow and the words were both calculated to enrage. But the increasing wildness of Metzen's attacks only left him vulnerable. Almost too fast for Wren to follow, the tip of the rook's sword snaked through the looping guard of Metzen's rapier and wrenched it from his hand. Metal grated as the hilt slid down the rook's blade. He twirled the trapped weapon in a full circle like a child with a toy, then tilted his hand so Metzen's sword flew clear. It flashed through the open air and sank, without a trace, in the waters of the canal. I believe that's Ninot, the rook said to Metzen, who was gaping after his blade. Do you submit? I do not! But I thought being disarmed was a clear loss under the rules. The rook stepped back, placing himself by the wall of the bridge. Alta, you're the closest we have to an arbiter. Will you call Ninot? She pulled herself back into character, relaxing from the impassive posture she'd held during the duel. Assuming the rules are like those of Soteris, then yes, to be disarmed is to be defeated. Ninot. Metzen took a step toward the rook, hands curled into fists. That rapier was imbued by the swordsmith Vicadrius herself. There isn't another like it in Nadezhra. The rook sheathed his blade. Then by all means, go after it. Renata saw the move coming. So did the rook. She suspected he'd invited it. When Metzen charged, the rook faded out of the way and applied boot to ass. The kick provided the extra momentum needed to send Metzen flying over the rail and into the canal. Though I believe it landed on the other side of the bridge. You might want to check there, the rook called down over the laughter and cheers from the onlookers. He hopped onto the rail and bowed. Then he turned to Renata. Now we see whether you, like our local nobility, will break the rules when it suits you. I believe you owe me a glove. And I will stop there.
So, as wonderful as these online experiences are for authors, like I couldn't do this, for example, because y'all are at San Francisco and I'm in New Orleans. We have a third. This is another lovely part of the online experience. You'll probably meet at least one of my cats during this as well. The unfortunate part, I think, is that you don't get the deserving applause that you want to get at the end of that scene, right? Because
it is the downside of online readings, yeah.
Right,
there's just
right.
silence.
So I know we're going to open up to questions a little bit later on, but I have a few questions of my own for the two of you. And much of it, I'm sure, will go into things like world building or things like craft, and I'm very much looking forward to that conversation. However, I know that this book began as kind of a conversation between the two of you in terms of tabletop role-playing games. And I've seen a couple of interviews with you where you've kind of answered some questions, but no one asks the burning question that I need desperately answered, which is Wren a College of Whispers bard? Is she a rogue or is she a bard rogue multi-class? Please enlighten me. And
Ren is a rogue, specifically a Pathfinder rogue, because the game that we were playing is set in the Pathfinder setting and uses those mechanics. She is one of the less combat effective rogues you will ever meet. Like, I mean, I've built her finally to have some amount of skill, but she was built to be a social rogue, like, through and through. So, you know, she gets the sneak attack bonus, but she's not really stacked for that.
Right on. And that definitely follows through the novel. You know, you definitely can get that sense of things with. It has all of the things that I love about role playing games. I think that y'all kind of drew out of the novel. And in particular, you were kind of doing voices with as you were reading, and that I'm gonna bring that up again just a little bit. But a question for the both of you that I also need to kind of get off of my chest. And on behalf of both Jacob and Copper Rose, what is it like to be monsters?
I mean, I tend to think that most writers are sadists to at least some extent. Like, we got to do some horrible things to our characters, which then you never forgive us for, and that means we've done our job right.
If we don't make them suffer, they can't learn and grow and become better and more interesting people.
Yeah, there may be a thing where we were commenting to our editor about sort of pounding on a particular character in book 2, and our editor was like, I'm not sure I like the sound of this. And I said, well, it's like tenderizing meat, you know? You have to kind of like bang on it for a while so that it can soften up and have the nice things later.
Yeah.
That was basically the answer I was expecting.
I mean, it's like you know us or something, but...
Sure. So on a more serious note, you know, kind of going back to that question of where this book kind of came from, the inspirations of it. You know, so the Rook, for example, as you're introduced to him, you kind of feel like, you know, just the basic description of him it feels very much like Zorro, but you know, knowing Alyc as I do, I feel a little bit of Scarlet Pimpernel in there as well. Right. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the kind of inspirations that came from this in terms of this novel, not necessarily just in a broad sense of like where did you get your ideas, but you know, the if you can remember any kind of real specific references, like why this particular character, you know, what are the building blocks of this particular character or this particular part of the lore.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that for the Rook, yes, you know me very well. And we actually, one of the kind of theme songs that I think, Marie, you even have it on your soundtrack.
So the soundtrack for the second book, yeah.
Or for the second book, for this there's a song called The Riddle. It's a not a duet, whatever, between three people. Trio. Thank you. It's been a long day. And it's called The Riddle, and it's the song that I think opens the second act of the Scarlet Pimpernel, and it's all about deception and betrayal and intrigue and screwing other people over before they screw you over. And it's just a great piece. And that's kind of our theme song, you know, for the entire story, for the trilogy, is that kind of feel for it. So definitely the Scarlet Pimpernel is there. Like you said, Zorro, a lot of the times we'll kind of mention the Dread Pirate Roberts because there's elements of that. There is definitely some Assassin's Creed.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Kind of, especially with kind of the visuals and the costume and everything like that. Alfred Noyes as the Highwayman is what I always quote when I talk about like our design, our costume design for him, because it's such a great like visual and description of clothing that is also really kind of evocative and sensual. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a wealth of stuff to draw from, and I don't think there's anything we didn't draw from.
Yeah. The only thing I'll say on the Assassin's Creed one, like the visual of it for me, like that's where I go first because I've got a picture on my computer. I don't know which Assassin's Creed game it's from. I think it might be the Victorian one, but you know, like when I think the Rook, that's pretty much the picture I get in my head. But he does not kill. That's kind of a strict thing for the Rook. And so, not an assassin.
I was going to say, and the witty banter is much more in the Zorro, Scarlet Pimpernel, Dreadpart Roberts kind of,
as opposed to grim vengeance kind of thing.
No, he enjoys what he does, and enjoys the kind of performative aspect of what he does.
There's a Carrick conversation about that in book 2.
There is a conversation about that in book 2.
insert hand rubbing together gif there. So taking it bigger than just that one character, then it feels and I don't know exactly how to describe it, but the city, it feels somewhat Venetian, and I think deliberately so, but not in. I'm reading another novel right now where it's literally a fantasy Venice, right? Where it's got a different name, but it's referred to as the Serene Empire. It's there are doges, right? Like the whole thing, and so talk about your world building a little bit in terms of how much, where's the slider bar in your heads, I guess, in terms of like drawing inspiration from things for the world and then making things up whole cloth. And, I'm fascinated by where people get this kind of stuff.
The kind of thing that you mentioned where like it's very clearly a fantasy analog to a specific place. I've kind of taken to calling that world and a half, because like it's secondary world, but it's really our world, like with some names changed. And so it's sort of halfway between, secondary world and historical fiction. And I coined that term when trying to describe the Memoirs of Lady Trent to people, because that I also think of as world and a half. This one, I'd say the slider is much more toward invention. We went into it knowing that we wanted to have masks because it fits the theme of deception, and we both just kind of think they're sexy, so why not? And the fact that we set it on a river delta where there's a lot of canals and a lot of, boats used to travel around, honestly, I think came about because Alyc has another project they're working on that has kind of something of a similar feel to it.
It's more Florence than Venice.
It's more Florence than Venice.
Most people wouldn't know.
But it's like the city is kind of built onto this cliff. So we're like, okay, let's not do a vertical structure to the city. Let's go very, very horizontal. Okay, it's on a river delta. Everything's flat.
And we also knew that we wanted it to be a trading center, just because of the kind of history we had with the colonizing kind of conquerors, and then the indigenous people who are not just in Nadezhra, the city, but are throughout this entire land. And so we wanted to be able to have that kind of trade moving through it, both east and west along a kind of a Silk Road, but then also along the river and through the over the ocean. So
but then in terms of what we put into that sort of container, that it feels very Venetian because there are canals and masks, but if you actually look at the culture and the clothing and those aspects of it, that's actually drawn from a much wider array of stuff, including stuff that's invented, because like the faces and the masks of Versenian religion were born out of an idea that I had about like playing with the duality of gods and saying that basically like the god of wealth or the deity of wealth and poverty, that's the same thing. The face is the benevolent side, the mask is the malevolent one. So like that was a thing I made up. The Versenians believing that the soul has 3 different parts was, I don't remember why Egyptian cosmology wandered into my head, but I'm like, right, in ancient Egypt there were like many parts to the soul. Let's use that. Right. The food, actually Versenian food, is based on like kind of pre-modern Chinese cuisine because the environment that they're in fits that. Like it's suitable for being a rice-based agriculture, and it's at latitudes where that makes sense. So we're drawing our kind of material from a bunch of different places.
Yeah. And what we're really trying to do, and this is where the kind of anthropological background comes in, is we're looking at the environment we have and saying, okay, what are the kinds of cultural adaptations that people have made to this kind of environment, and kind of in a broad survey rather than we're going to pick that and put it in wholesale here. We're looking at a broad survey and saying, okay, what is the tendency in this kind of thing? Now let's make it specific to this place. And that's where you get a lot of the stuff that's invented, although it's also things that you might see in other places and cultures because they've had that invention as well.
Yeah, they've adapted in similar ways.
So how much of the rest of the world do you have built out? You know, because I don't know how many other places you're going or things like that, but I know, you know, in some secondary world fantasy, it's literally the whole world. You know, you know the whole cosmology and that sort of thing.
There are certain things that we talked about at the very beginning because we wanted to have a sense of, especially on the level of cosmology, since you mentioned that specifically, it's the feeling of you want, as an author, to maybe have some sense of how do these different cosmologies fit together, rather than it just being, oh, this one is correct and the other one is straight up wrong. Which is why, for example, Leganti religion has a similar idea of duality, but they say that it's actually pairs of deities, where you get like one is the nice one and one is the bad one, rather than that being two aspects of the same thing. So, like, that's their take on it.
And I would say that it's not even necessarily that they do one is the nice one and one is the bad one.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
Is that they're kind of paired concepts. I think Marie froze.
You froze, actually, Alyc.
froze.
I did.
There we go. You're back now.
I'm going to
You're
let
back.
you guys talk because I stopped working, I think.
You're back, I think, but go ahead.
Oh, there you go. Sorry.
Duality, not
Duality.
good,
Anyways,
but-
yeah. So it's more like with Leganti, there's paired concepts of like the divine soul and the mortal soul, and the kind of the individual and family, and wealth and power. Like these are sex and death. These are kind of things that end up getting paired together conceptually.
For stuff that isn't cosmological, you know, if we've done our job right, it sounds like we know plenty of stuff about the rest of the world, but it's actually more like those old Hollywood sets where, you know, there's 2x4s propping it up, because the trilogy is going to take place entirely in Nadezhra. We are not planning on having the characters leave the city and go adventuring through the world. The places that we know more about are the ones that impinge in some fashion. Like, we know a little bit about Soteris because Ren is pretending to be from Soteris. We know a little bit about Gantlech because that's where Tess is from, Isarn down to the south. But we can't tell you things of like, what do they eat there and what is their clothing like and how exactly do they practice religion. We do have an idea for a follow-up series, if we get the chance to do that, which probably will, among other places, bring Isarn more onto the stage. And so I've started getting like back of the brain, maybe we could put this in there and have that other thing.
Well, it's funny because we there are parts of that we have an idea of the basics, but we haven't really mapped it out because it's not important. But then there are other things that we have mapped out pretty extensively that have not shown up anywhere in the book, especially around like folklore.
Oh yeah,
and I think that kind of reveals where our biases are. That we've spent a lot of time discussing folklore and things that actually never come up anywhere in the books, except maybe in kind of passing reference because we like stories.
Yeah, there's plenty of stuff, especially within the cultures that we've developed heavily, where I'm like, oh yeah, we know all kinds of crap that isn't even on the page because we just thought it up. You know, I posted some of that stuff. I was doing folklore threads on Twitter for a little while, and I should probably collate those onto our website. You know, stuff like there's the trickster heroine, Clever Natalia, and we know some stories about her.
So kind of going back, like I said, I was going to, coming back to, during your reading, you did a number of different voices. And I think it was clear, but just to make sure it's entirely clear to our audience, some of those voices are Ren in her head, who she quote unquote really is.
Yes.
Some of those voices, some of the accents are the, and I'm not going to pronounce it correctly, the city itself.
Nadezhra,
that one. And then some of it is the city that she is pretending to be.
Yeah.
And the reason I bring that up, and the reason I was so glad that you did that, the way that a good DM would in a session of D&D, is because it's very apparent when you're reading it on the page that she is switching between these various things, and that and knowing what I know, having read the whole book, there's other things going on there in terms of the Rook and other people who are standing around in terms of that kind of thing as well. So my long-winded question is, there's a thread, and I use that term deliberately, but there's a thread running through the entire novel that is, just kind of humming, which is this question of identity.
Yeah.
And this question of who are you? How much of that is internal? How much of that is a decision? How much of that is the world dictating to you? It's just beautifully layered over and over again. And I wondered if that was foundational, if that was something that came out through the writing, and if so, if it is, if that's a thread that runs through the entire novel, or if there are multiple threads, if like book one is about identity and book two is about something else, or so on.
It definitely was foundational because, you know, as is apparent here, Ren was my PC, or is my PC in this game that Alyssa's running. You know, the starting concept was she's a con artist who's passing herself off as a foreign noblewoman in order to kind of con her way into wealth, but she's actually, you know, from the sort of local population. And so, yeah, in the game, I basically had to teach myself to do something that can at least vaguely pass for a Slavic accent, because I wanted to be able to perform, okay, when she's Renata, I'm speaking in like received pronunciation, British accent. When she's being herself, or Arenza, kind of passing herself off as fully Versenian, then it's the Slavic accent. And this led to some interesting things when it came time to do the audiobook, because I wound up having to go through the entire manuscript and mark, like, okay, which accent is she speaking in where? And also to a lesser extent for Grey Serrato, because he's Versenian, but he's kind of like, you know, learned to sort of make himself more palatable to the Leganti. And so most of the time he speaks in the Nadezhdan accent, which is just the, you know, straight Midwestern American. But when he goes and deals with Versenian matters, like he'll code switch, he'll drop into that accent. So things like that. And there's a few other accent considerations in the book as well. So yeah, I literally had to mark up the manuscript for the narrator and be like, Alyssa, I don't know why you keep evicting the cat.
He wants to be fed. I realized that we scheduled this at his dinner time, or like an hour before his dinner time.
Which is dinner time.
Yeah. Yeah, so the accent thing has been an interesting challenge. And let me tell you, doing a reading with multiple accents in the same text is doing your public reading on hard mode. Like sometimes I'll screw it up a bit. But the identity thing was foundational, because the idea from the start was that Ren was a con artist, and that she would be, you know, passing herself off as A when she's actually B. Over time, that developed another layer of, well, she's only half Versenian, and so she's got complicated feelings about that. Obviously, we've got.
And she wasn't raised in kind of like the core Versenian culture, so she feels even an outsider in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, when she's interacting with the Leganti, heck yeah, she's Versenian, and then she goes and deals with like actual Versenians and starts having ethnic imposter syndrome. And then. You know, with having this hooded vigilante, obviously we were going to be playing identity games there. I would say it is something that's going to run through the whole series, because those aren't things that just got like tied off in a bow at the end of this book. But the nature of the game that we're playing with it changes, because in the first book, there's a lot of, you know, still presenting mysteries to the reader. By the second book, the reader is in on those mysteries in many places. And so it's more, you get to have fun watching the characters scramble to keep the house of cards up, or, you know, what happens when it falls down.
And I would say, like, if there's a theme that kind of goes over the whole series that this identity is one aspect of, or one reflection of, it's a lot more to do more with trust and honesty, like in relationships, and being able to be open and open yourself up to trust. And so go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the Mask of Mirrors, as I point over the wrong shoulder here, is in the pattern deck that Versenians use for divination. The Mask of Mirrors is the card of secrets and lies, which is very much this first book. And appropriately, the second book is the Liar's Nod, which is the card of trust and betrayal. So as Alyssa was saying, that's like kind of another layer of this, and that's the one that we're going to be kind of ringing the changes on in book two.
Something else I'm really interested in terms of identity is that it ties into the setting as well, right? There's this constant question of which nationality is this city? You know, to whom does it belong? Does it belong to its people? Does it belong to the vassal states and all that kind of stuff? So it's great stuff, top to bottom.
And it's interesting because you've got kind of macro micro, because much like with Ren, who is like half Versenian, half Leganti, kind of raised by a Versenian mother, but kind of doesn't feel as in touch with kind of the core Versenian thing. You've got a city that has been conquered for 200 years, and while the ruling class are the descendants of the Leganti, a lot of the population are like mixed. I mean, they have, family on both sides and don't really feel a connection to Seste Legante, that country, but they don't necessarily feel a connection to the rest of Versailles. So it's this kind of hybrid, as much as Ren is also.
Yeah.
Right.
Which, totally an accident. Yeah, we didn't plan that at all. Nope.
And so we're gonna. This will be my last question. But so from there, thinking of these questions of like identity and playfulness in games, where talk about the magic a little bit and how does that get and again, I'm doing this deliberately, interwoven with all of these other questions.
Yeah.
Interesting you bring up a textile metaphor for that.
Yeah. I didn't know I had it in me.
I'll talk about pattern first then, since you just, set that up for the spike. Yeah, so we knew going in because, again, this was sort of in the game, Ren had been a fortune teller. So we're like, okay, we want her to be a fortune teller in the book as well, because we had a lot of fun playing around with that. So we decided that we were going to create a deck rather than just taking the tarot and giving the cards different names. It's an entirely new structure. And that was the one that I kind of took point on because it was tied in more closely with Ren. And so I came up with the idea for the deck and I was building the structure of it and we needed a name for it. So we're batting around all kinds of words. This was one of those like horribly open-ended questions.
So long.
Yeah, because it's one of those like, it could be called anything. How do we decide? And we ended up lighting on pattern. And like 0.27 seconds later, boom, textile metaphors everywhere you look.
Right.
So like the different suits of the pattern deck are referred to as threads, and it's the spinning thread, the woven thread, the cut thread. The spinning thread is said to represent the inner self, so it's kind of like mental and spiritual matters. The woven thread is the outer self, so that is your social relationships and the institutions in society. The cut thread is the physical self, so that's the body and the material world. And then there's also a set of like clan cards that have fallen out of use. We talk about them more in the second book. And then the religion shows up because the equivalent to court cards are the faces and the masks, and you get these in pairs because of the way the religion works. So the counterpart to the Mask of Mirrors is the Face of Glass, which is the card of truth and honesty and revelations. And so we built out all of this stuff. You can lay like a 9-card spread to look at somebody's whole pattern. But if there's like a particular problem that you're wrestling with, you might just do a 3-card line. And that's going to show you where you stand, what path you should follow, and where it will lead you to. Because the number 7 comes up a bunch in the setting, we later decided there needed to be a 7-card spread as well. So we've designed one of those. And it's got, like religious significance, but at the same time, we're anthropologists. So we took one look at it and went, well, obviously people would also use this for completely mundane purposes like playing games.
Yeah.
Which from a, planning perspective, don't design a non-numerical deck and then decide you want to play card games with it, because most card games assume numbers on the cards. Yeah. We have worked out a few. The one that gets kind of shown in the book, Nitsa, is based on Koi Koi, which is a Japanese card game using Hanafuda cards that don't have numbers on them. So that was a good model. I have worked out a way to play a poker variant with it called Sixes. So Sixes gets mentioned as well. And then I've got a half-baked system for playing a sort of rummy type game based on 4-color cards, which are another Asian model. But the problem is I have an app on my phone for playing 4-color cards that doesn't seem to quite work like the rules that I read, so I don't really understand the game well enough, and I haven't yet found anybody who knows how to play it who can explain it to me. But we had fun, building this in just all over the place, that like there's going to be references to it constantly. That's why we did things like the chapter titles are all pattern cards. Mm-hmm. And like at one point the Laughing Crow comes up in book 2. One of the characters is like, isn't that a restaurant? Like, yes, it is also that.
It's also a restaurant, but
yes.
It is named after. Yeah.
Yeah. Because, people would do that. So yeah, that was something that we knew we wanted to be central, and it's the reason why textile metaphors are all over Versenian culture. Like their clothing, they're very proud of their embroidery. There's also regions that make very good lace. We talk about street gangs being knots. That's actually something that I found in a book of like historical British slang. That is an old term for a gang, and we took one look at that and went, "Yep, yoink." Doing the knotwork stuff that's modeled a bit on like Chinese knotwork, because that's more like varied and complex than macrame is. Macrame usually just uses square knots over and over again. So yeah, it just went everywhere. It permeated every aspect of Versenian life, which we like because it means the culture has that feeling of coherence. Like these things aren't just randomly chosen.
Yeah.
And then I'll let Alyc talk about the numinatria and the astrology, which will segue nicely into something else.
Well, and I was actually going to really quick talk about like the three different magic systems, because when you talk about kind of coherence and cosmology and the idea that we had, because there are three systems rather than two. There's pattern, which is a kind of a divinatory system. There's numinatria, which is a very kind of ritual kind of sigil-based system. And then you have imbuing, which is just kind of magical crafting. And there's no system to it. It's more, you can make items that work better because you've kind of taken the time and kind of gotten into the flow and actually put some of your life energy into the construction of them, so that they, boots are more comfortable, or they, if you jump, you can land better. Short swords are sharper, things like that. And when you talk about cosmology, there's an interesting macro-micro thing, because those three systems reflect or are reflected by the three sets of the pattern cards.
Yeah. Numinatria is kind of like the spinning thread, the more mental, spiritual end of things. Pattern is the more social side, because it's actually about the connections between stuff. That like when you are reading somebody's fate or whatever, it's because what you're reading are the ways things are connecting to each other. And then imbuing is your cut thread. It's the physical, concrete, let me make this object kind of thing. And it's also the unloved stepchild of the three, because it doesn't get the respect that pattern and numinatria do.
It's not really something that can be like codified and taught, or like you can't have an apprenticeship except by going and learning to do a particular craft. But yeah, and then for numinatria, which is the kind of Leganti, Sateran Leganti magic that has kind of been brought in and incorporated into Desra. So Marie had done a lot of the work on the pattern stuff. And so when we were like, okay, well, we need to work out this Leganti style magic, because there's going to be a lot of stuff going on with that, because she had done a lot of that work, and also because one of the main practitioners of numinatria is Vargo, who was kind of more in my wheelhouse. We decided that I should do it. And so Marie had a book. Marie had a book.
Had is the operative word here.
No, because I bought a new copy and I gave it to you.
Yes, now I have a book. It's not the one I loaned you. It's just
not the one
copy.
And it's way over there, so I can't actually go get it right now. But it's A Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe, I believe is the title. And it is a book that talks about kind of geometry and numbers 0 through 9, or 0 through 10 actually, and they're kind of meaning in different cosmological contexts and meaning in different kind of scientific contexts, and the ways that figures are constructed in kind of like Ptolemaic, geometry and stuff like that, or Euclidean. I'm getting lost. But so she gave me that book, and I went away and was like, okay, I'm going to create this magic system that's based on numerology and sacred geometry.
And as a brief interjection here, when we're like, oh, we should do something with sacred geometry, and Alyc said, oh, I like that kind of thing, so let me play around with this. And I said, oh, I've got this book. And I hand it off to Alyc, and then they leave, and I'm left there going, I last read that book in high school. I mean, I remember liking it then, but God, I hope it's not actually like embarrassingly bad. I don't remember. Then, like 3 days later, Alyc can now resume the tale.
I come back with like a fully fleshed out system, like a document like 7 pages long, that's talking about all the different numbers and their meanings, and the associated animals and metals and colors and
Parts of the body.
how this ritual magic would be like, executed in these big gigantic figures that are chalked on the ground. There's even like a kind of a ritual phrase that gets said at the beginning of a working. So yeah, I went a little crazy on it, and I have a lot of fun.
In my head, when you're explaining this thing, you're that GIF from Always Sunny where he's pointing at the wall and then gesturing and pointing at the wall and gesturing.
It's a bit like that, except imagine the red strings are making these intricate geometric shapes.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, kind of when you think about it in terms of the cosmology and fitting into Leganti culture, it's nice as both its own thing, an expression of the Leganti who view themselves as very kind of rational, very logical and systemic. Everything that they do is kind of based on contracts and much more kind of rational models.
They're very Apollonian in the Apollonian Dionysian sort of.
Yeah. And so it's a great expression of that. And then it's also a great kind of counter to or foil for the kind of Racenian intuitive magic that is very much based on like kind of divination and intuition and connections between things. So it kind of makes a nice dichotomy between those two. And so we have that. And then about halfway through writing the book, we had a character who was an astrologer. And we realized that we kind of had this thing where, we want her to do Renata's chart, because that will get Renata in trouble because
Renata's fake chart.
because it'll be her fake birthday. And all of a sudden we were like, so I guess we need to figure out how astrology works at a much more granular level than it's numinatria stuff. So I went back to the drawing board and took all the numinatria and worked out a whole astrology system for charts using our in-world calendar that we had created that is also like very rational. It's very
like everything is decimalized with the Leganti.
Everything is decimalized.
Money is decimalized. Their calendar is decimalized. The clock is decimalized, which actually is something that Republican France, like during the French Revolution era, there was a stretch of time where they did that. They had a decimal clock and a decimal calendar. It didn't work terribly well and got dumped not long after. But that's kind of where the idea for that came from.
Yeah.
If people want more detail on this stuff, our website, macarrick.com, actually has, because the doc that Alyc sent me after that weekend of like, here, let me learn through this book. Oh my God, this just landed on me. The document was named Numinatria for Newbies. And so there is that, which is, the one on the website is a condensed version of what Alyc sent me. And then there is Pattern for Professionals, Imbuing for Initiates, and Astrology for Amateurs, because we had to run with the model there.
Yeah.
Our URL just popped up on the screen. But yeah, so you can see the kind of core principles for how all of this stuff works there. And then I believe we have a demonstration.
We have a demonstration because so I know that we offered that 3 lucky individuals would be getting an astrological chart based on whatever date they wanted to give us, and then transposed into our calendar. But we figured that nobody would actually know what that was or if it was really anything interesting that we even want. So I made one up for Bryan, and I'm going to kind of go through it now while there it is.
I will say, if anybody wants to drop any questions into the comments section, feel free, and then we will hit those after we're done uncovering all of the secrets of Bryan's life.
Great.
Yes.
You should definitely sign up to try to get one of these, but I will warn you, it is creepily accurate.
Remind me to come back to that creepy accurate thing after the astrology is done, because I've got a comment on that.
So this is like, and it's a little challenging. We kind of gave ourselves a difficult puzzle because this is what a numinat would look like. Any numinat. This just happens to be an astrological numinat. And so when you kind of hear them being described in the book, this is the kind of thing we're trying to describe. And so it is very complicated and very all these geometric shapes, and they're kind of charted out in a particular kind of way along this golden spiral. And I realize I'm showing you with my mouse and you can't see my mouse moving. But there's this golden spiral that is inside this circle, and all the kind of other figures are charted along that. And for an astrological chart. Is it flashing on and off for you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
not sure what's causing that.
I don't know. Yeah, we should just leave it there. I think that's fine.
Maybe it was trying to do the slideshow thing or
I
something.
think it was trying to, cycle through the slideshow.
Slideshow of one image.
But so for this, the way that astrology works is there are basically 3 different things that get charted: your prime, your altar, and your trisect. And your prime is basically your birth month, what we would usually think of as your star sign, Scorpio, Libra, etc., Virgo. Since I know we have Scorpios and Virgos in here, those should be the 2 that I cite. So that is basically your prime, and that's based on the month in our calendar, but then also depending on what time of day you're born, if you're born in the daytime or at night, it can actually be either solely your prime, which means you're a very type A personality, or it can be your prime influenced by the kind of paired month, which means you're kind of a more diversified, balanced, but also maybe a little flaky and wishy-washy. So that's your prime. Your altar is based on your birthday and where it kind of appears. We have 36-day months, and so it's kind of both the day and where it appears in the month. And so you'll see like there's your altar has a main Newman that's associated with, and then an influence. So for Bryan, it's Tuat and then Tuat, which we will get to. And then your trisect is basically your century, decade, and year of your birth. And those are more kind of general ideas, kind of about how you intersect with the world. So it's not so much you personally, but it's how you kind of work with the world. So for Bryan, I have the reading here. He's ruled by Quarat, which is the cornucopia of life. And the kind of idea of Quarat is it's about wealth and luck and fortune. And so somebody who's ruled by Quarat is somebody who kind of appreciates the wealth that life has granted them, but they're also affected a lot by kind of the turns of fortune. So they know that fate kind of gives with one hand and takes away with the other. And then influenced by Quinat, which is Bryan is influenced by Quinat. He's not just Quarat. Quinat is the hand that holds the world. So it's the card of like power and kind of power, but also excellence and like kind of personal excellence and arete. So the idea of Quinat is this person is committed to excellence. They strive for it in all things and can become frustrated when their goals exceed their grasps. But it's also the card of it's also the Newman of healing. So it's a person who also has the ability to kind of heal the ills of the world if they can look beyond their own ambition to see them. So that's the individual, which is dictated by the prime. And then the altar is kind of your path through life. And Bryan's is really interesting because he is Tuat influenced by Tuat. So Tuat is the self in other. It's kind of that, being yin yang, being pregnant with your opposite, like all of those kinds of raw and cooked dichotomy things. And so Tuat, the path for Tuat is an ever looping path that leads you back to where you started, only to find that you are the one who has changed. And because Bryan is got Tuat and Tuat, it's exponentially so in his case. So he needs to be careful not to wander in circles. And then kind of going out into the trisect, which is how he kind of his path travels through the world and the way that those two intersect. His year is Sesot, which is the strength of the many, and that's hexagons are the bestigons. Hexagons are they're like a very strong, solid, good base, and you see them all over the place in nature. So like bees, beehive, things like that. So for Sesot, the great events and great people that shatter and shape the world might be the chisel, but the small choices, the insignificant individuals, and the invisible social structures are the hammer that gives it strength. So the whole idea of Sesot, if Quinat is like the individual power and excellent, then Sesot is the strength of the community and of the many. His decade is Quarat, which we've already kind of seen, but in this instance, it's the world turns with the seasons, and bounty is followed by privation, but eventually bad luck will flip to good. So it's kind of that fortune always turns on hopefully more than a dime for you. And then the century, which this is interesting because for everybody in this book, this century is Ninot. And Ninot is death, it's apotheosis, it's the ending of things, it's the kind of gateway to the divine, because we have this kind of cycle of reincarnation where people will go through life and then they, hit Ninot, they die, they pass along to the Lumen, which is their kind of divine godhead for the Leganti, and then they are purified, and then they're reborn, and they go through the cycle again. So it's got this kind of cyclical feel. So Ninot is the final truth of the world. People die, regimes fall, empires crumble, from the ashes spring new life. And so that's kind of Bryan's chart. And he can tell you how much he wants to tell you about how accurate it is. But I will say the other really interesting thing, so there's our months and everything like that is all based on this Leganti system, but the weekdays are actually based on, we use the old Vrasenian names for the days, because it's one of those things where you can impose a calendar, but it's really hard to make people like change what they're calling a particular like day of the week, because that's much more embedded in culture. And so we have this thing where the weekdays are still the old Vrasenian names for weekdays. And so Bryan is born on Velachny, which is the day of the clan Dvornik, the clan of the fox. And so as a fox, he is a charming bon vivant and a crafty huckster. And there's this kind of old poem like Monday's child is loving and giving kind of poem. And Velachny's day is Velachny beguiled with a clever tongue. So I think that is definitely fitting. And yeah, there you go. There's your chart.
On the creepily accurate thing, I've got this written up, though I haven't yet put it on our site. I need to finish polishing it. But one of the things that I think has been interesting about writing these books is all of the patterns in the books are actual patterns that we have laid. I've got a deck of blank cards that I wrote the card names on, and unless it's something where Ren has literally stacked the deck, like with the Kindly Hawk con, we didn't lay a pattern for that because she wasn't laying a pattern, she was using a stacked deck. But everything else, we shuffle the cards, we lay them out, and we write what we get. Which the reason that there's a sort of post that I want to put up about this is that there are a few asterisks on that. There was one pattern that we had to tweak slightly because we changed the deck partway through the novel. We realized we wanted to, we wanted more unaligned cards rather than the faces of the masks were slightly too large of a proportion, and there were some concepts we hadn't really gotten in there. And that was fine, except that this one pattern, we also took two cards that had been separate and we combined them into one because they were too similar. And this one pattern had both of those cards. So we're like, crap. Okay, we got to do something about that. Yeah. There was another one that we relayed because we completely changed the plot it was connected to. It's the one that Ren as Arenza lays for Leato out on the street. And, somebody wants his dinner.
Yes, I know.
We actually completely changed what was going on with that plot. So we relayed that pattern.
We had to relay that one.
It was looking at the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But the reason Ren gets a migraine in the middle of that one pattern late in the book is because the middle card would have blown that plot completely out of the water at a point in time when we needed that not to happen.
Well, and I will say that's not as cheating, though, because there are magical reasons why the thing she was trying to lay a pattern on would have been protected from being tried upon, basically.
And we had decided in advance of the pattern, we're like, it's only because Ren is as good as she is that she's going to get anything out of this. Like most people, if they tried to do this, they would get nothing. We got to that middle card, and we're like, good thing there is a reason here, because otherwise, there goes the plot.
Right.
But yeah, the deck has been it plays very nicely most of the time with what we're doing in the story. So I take that as a sign that it is a very well-constructed deck.
Yeah.
So in terms of its accuracy, as a dude who wrote his first novel about trickster figures and dualities and things, I'm just sitting here without gloves, guys. Really
when I got all the Quorat stuff and it was like a fortune, I'm like, Bryan's gonna think I made this like completely up.
But no, I mean we give the detail.
We did make it all up.
We did.
But we did not make it up specifically for you.
Right. Fair.
I saw that we did get a question popping up in chat. So Lenny was asking, one thing would be, will we get more point of view characters in book 2, maybe Pavlin as well, and will we ever find out the identity of Ren's dad? We do not expand our point of view characters, at least in the second book. I won't rule out the possibility that in the third we might, but we've already got.
It would take a really strong. Yeah. We would need a very strong reason to do it, because I think that, that tends to not work a lot of times when you expand POV. Like, and it's a good structure for us to limit ourselves, so we're not tempted to do that.
Right. One of our guidelines was we did not want to have any one-off points of view. That, like, if somebody was going to be a point of view character, you would get their perspective multiple times. And so we've got our 3 main ones of Ren, Gray, and Vargo, and then the kind of secondary ones where you've got Tess and Sedge and Denaya and Juna. And that's already quite a lot of point of view characters, especially when we need to make sure that they all get to recur and do interesting things. So
now, that being said, I don't think either of us are against the idea of, because we do have short fiction. Marie has written a couple pieces of short fiction in this in this setting, and I know, like, I saw that somebody mentioned Pavlin, and I'm like, I know that's a character that I would love to kind of explore in like a short fiction kind of a thing. So yeah,
so you might get it that way, but we're not planning on expanding, because I have to admit, as somebody who was basically, like, the Wheel of Time was my first fandom, and one of the things that, like, even when I was sort of fully fanish about it, the temptation that you could see Jordan giving into to expand his point of view, that, like, anytime he needed you to know something, he would add a point of view for that. And I could just see all the problems that it led to, where either the scene really didn't have enough meat to it, it was just, like, there to give you that one detail, or instead of it feeling flimsy, it would be, okay, well, I'm going to build this up so that it justifies itself, and now you have spawned an entire new subplot that may or may not end up, like, getting handled in a timely manner. So yeah, our stricture is that we've got to set things up in such a fashion where, like, our characters that we're using for point of view need to find out about that themselves, rather than us just hopping over there to somebody else's point of view to show it to you.
Yeah, and I think, like, it is a good structure for us, because we are already, like, telling such a complicated story that it forces us to be really kind of tight and considered with what's happening and who's involved in it, and so that we don't get sprawl, which as complicated as the story is, I think we could fall into that if we didn't have kind of these guardrails.
Gotta snip those threads off.
Yeah. And then as for Ren's dad, we're not going to give you full spoilers, but that is a thing that we're planning on doing something with. Yes, that's about the most non-spoilery way I can think to find it, or to describe it. Any other questions?
I do have a couple of other things I want to ask, so I'll give a second to see if anybody else has anything they want to say. If not.
Well, I mean, you can launch one of yours right now, and then we can.
Sure. Yeah. So my so I have 2 really. The first one is really kind of quick. So the astrological, the circle with the spiral in it. I know that you use the terms, tuat and those are just the numbers, right? In terms of how they're using it. In swordplay, but when I looked at it, like, one of the first things I thought of was the Master's Wheel from the Mask of Zorro, right? And so is there kind of a connection there between the learning of swordplay and Numenatra circles and all of that kind of stuff?
So the answer is not as much as I wanted there to be, because the person that I emailed never got back to me. But there is a style of fencing called La Verdadera Destreza, or just Destreza is how it usually gets referred to. And Mike Underwood, friend and fellow author, I worked with him on Born to the Blade, which is a cereal box project that was all about, like, basically magical fencing. Think sort of like Avatar: The Last Airbender, but you got swords instead. And when we were working on that, he sent out kind of a cheat sheet talking about the different styles that different groups in that setting used for their fencing. And his gloss for Destreza was, I kill you with geometry. So we have fencing in this book, and I'm like, well, naturally, Leganti fencing is going to be basically Destreza. So if you know your fencing styles, the Leganti stance is described as being like, you've got your arm kind of already extended at shoulder height rather than bent the way a lot of other styles will do. That's kind of the hallmark of Destreza, because I was like, yeah, that would absolutely be their fencing style. And I emailed somebody who knows Destreza because I wanted to find a way to work that into, like, Leato says it in passing when he's teaching Ren, of a little bit of, Uniat, Tuat, etc., something like that. But it's only just like this one sentence because I never got the info. I don't do Destreza. That wasn't the style that I studied at all. So I'm like, yeah, I don't know enough to make that go. But that's sort of there in the background, yes. That there's a Numinatrian. I think it's more that they use Numinatria as their way of explaining the fencing rather than the fencing itself feeding into Numinatria.
Yeah. But we do kind of make it clear that there is the Leganti style and then there is the Versenian style, and that they are different. And part of that is because Leganti do have this kind of Destreza style.
Yeah. So yes, but not as much as I wanted.
Gotcha. We do have another question. Clothes are such a, well, hi Hugh, first off.
Hi Hugh.
Secondly, clothes are such a rich component of this book. Any favorites? If you could have one of the described garments, which would it be?
I want Vargo's Knight of Bells costume. Like I want that robe. Like, so not I mean, yes, I want it on Vargo, but I just want the outfit too.
Or off him, that's also okay.
Or off him.
Yeah, and that one actually, one of our running jokes, except is it a joke when it's true, is that the biggest disagreements we got into in the course of writing The Mask of Mirrors were over basically how to get Vargo appropriately undressed, essentially. One of them was the Knight of Bells costume, because like, okay, he's gonna go dressed as this courtesan, but we had a really hard time figuring out how to sell the idea of it, because the problem is just all of our like visual language in our culture for sexualization, like the way that it works on women and the way that it works on men are not the same thing, and men basically very rarely get sexualized in the same kind of way that women do. So like, how do we get that sense but the dude version? And it took us a while to figure that out. Judging by the number of comments we succeeded. I think it worked. And the other is then late in the book, there's a bit where we're like, okay, we need Vargo to have his coat off. And I was like, well, that's fine. He's in a rush. He just goes out of the house without his coat on.
And I was like, Vargo would never do that.
So we had to find a way.
The collaboration runs to a screeching halt.
Well, and it was a pretty long conversation as we're kind of trying to figure it out. And we were finally like, you know what, let's table it. We'll figure it out as we write it. And the way we write is back and forth in a Google Doc at a very kind of, line or paragraph level. It's a very granular level. And so I wrote my bit and I sent it off to Marie, and at one point in this journey that Vargo was now on, and she sent me back her bit, and it had Vargo removing his coat for incredibly in-character reasons. It was so perfect. And so I was like, yes, that's it. That's how you do it.
As for favorites, it's a little tough because, I mean, some of it is there's things where I'm like, I really like that thing, but I wouldn't look good in it. Like, I probably would look better in the Leganti styles because I'm kind of like high-waisted anyway, and so the sort of like the women's style of the bandeau and then the thing falling from there, that would look good on me. But, there's things like, oh, Ren has that sort of cranberry wool coat, and I'm like, I get cold so easily, the thought of like an imbued wool coat.
I will say that I actually, when we were writing that, I designed that coat with Marie in mind. Like, as I was describing that coat, I was like, Marie would love this coat.
You haven't mentioned that before, so that's new.
Oh, yeah. No, that coat was designed for you.
But then all of the, like, brocades and such that Vargo wears, I'm like, yeah, I could go for some of those. We actually do have ambitions to sew things, at the very least in the style, if not the specific outfits, because we might not have the right fabric, but we kind of want to make some of that. That's true of a lot of the like, physical material in these books. Like, we want to crowdfund a pattern deck at some point with like the full art and everything so that you can have a proper pattern deck. And like, it would be cool to find one of the companies that makes like, fake coins and things like that for different things and make like some Numinatrian medallions or whatever. Like, a lot of the material culture here we really want to have for ourselves.
Yeah. I think the one most likely to happen like soonest is the pattern deck, because we've talked about that a lot, and might even try to do a couple promo cards potentially. Yeah.
Yeah, we are actually making concrete plans for trying to crowdfund that, as opposed to it's a completely pie in the sky. Yeah, maybe someday we'll do it.
No.
So, you know,
the challenge is like getting enough support to get enough money to pay the artist,
Right.
because we,
Yeah,
obviously want to pay the artist.
yeah, I have looked
that-
into how much this kind of thing costs, and
Hmm.
our off-the-cuff calculation, I mean, it would depend on the artist and what they're charging, but we'd probably need to raise at least $20,000, which is a chunk. So,
Right. That actually leads me to my next and probably last question. But this started as a collaboration of a role-playing game, and you then went off and built a world, and you are telling one story in it, but it also has that that well-stitched, comfortable clothing feeling of it being a world that other people could tell stories in. And so, do you have any kind of thoughts or plans even of maybe establishing a role-playing system, or even just kind of or something like that to turn it back around and let people tell their own stories in the city?
I mean, I think to some extent there are different systems that you could use to run a game in the setting, which we know in part because just last
Sunday,
oh my God.
Yeah.
A little over a week ago, we played in a one-shot Blades in the Dark game that our friend Mike Underwood, who I mentioned before, ran for us with my husband and our friend Emily Dare also playing in it. And Blades in the Dark is well-suited to doing the kind of like not level street gang stuff, because it's made for like, here is your crew of thieves or like, knee breakers or whatever, leg breakers, that's the word I wanted, that are doing this kind of thing. And so if you wanted to do a game about like Knots in Nadezhra doing their street warfare, gang stuff, then Blades in the Dark would be fantastic for that. Apparently the people behind that system are also working on a supplement called Court of Blades that would be more on the sort of like nobility end of things, which we said, okay, so that's the upper bank way to run a Rook and Rose game, whereas Blades in the Dark is the lower bank way to do it. Now, in terms of a game designed for this, I do not have the skill set to design that myself, but if somebody wanted to do it, I think we would both be like, hell yeah.
Yeah, I think I would want somebody who is more versed in different kinds of mechanics systems, because I mean, we've both run many different systems and know mechanics very well, but I don't think, with a few exceptions, because I know Marie has one that she's come up with that's pretty cool, I don't think we are as interested in kind of mechanics as we are in the kind of setting and story. And so I think that side of it we could totally do, but I think we would want to collaborate with somebody on the mechanics side of it. I don't know how I would mechanize Numenatria.
Yeah, I mean, I love hacking existing systems to get them to work for something they weren't quite designed for. And yeah, as you mentioned, my brain very unhelpfully handed me like what sort of amounts to a class framework, only it's not exactly classes, for a game that I think would be really great, but that doesn't give me a whole system because you need like dice and such. And how does the dice mechanic work? I'm not really equipped to come up with that one myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, so if somebody wants to design a game, contact us.
So we have one more question.
Yeah.
Alyc, I know you're quite the seamstress. Have you ever made a completely new outfit from the parts of another? Isn't that immensely difficult? So if you haven't read the novel, there are it's a very significant plot point that they take various garments apart and recombine them into something else.
So I have broken things down and repurposed them. And I don't know if that quite answers your question, but I will also say I am not actually Tess.
I mean, if you've got a self-insert, it might be Tess, but
Tess is the closest to a self-insert that I think I have. But she's definitely much more skilled than I am, and she can also use magic, like she can imbue. So, I'm trying to think. Like, I think, I've done like that with some Halloween costumes, but it's been a lot more like breaking things apart and kind of remaking them. Like, I'm thinking like Pretty in Pink, except the dress in that was so horrifically bad that I don't really want to bring it up. So yeah, sort of.
Yeah, like if Tess is really more like your aspirational self-insert. It's the, you wish that you were that good. At which point I started thinking, who would be my aspirational self-insert? And I'm like, Rivchek.
Rivchek. I was going to say, yeah.
I maybe not quite as much the flamboyantly flirtatious part, because that is just very profoundly not me, but I would love to defend like Rivchek.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I could just continue talking about this book with the two of you for quite some time.
I think what you really want is for us to stop broadcasting so you can ask all the spoiler questions.
Yeah.
yeah, pretty much. Well, that and, stop broadcasting so you could, write the next book, which is also, very much in these greedy wanting hands. So, but yeah.
I was going to say the next book is written. It's the third book we're on now.
Yeah,
okay,
we are not quite done revising the second book. There's a little more revision to be done still, but yeah.
So yeah, definitely buy Mask of Mirrors if you haven't, and you will definitely be looking forward, like the rest of us, to The Liar's Knot.
And I want to show everyone the cover of this book because the cover is so cool. We
got really lucky.
Yeah, it was very Mardi Gras to me.
Yeah. And we are hoping soon we will get to see the cover for The Liar's Knot, because that one is actually scheduled for November. So we're moving into the zone where they've got to get a cover for it. And we are so excited.
Oh, wow, that's quick.
Yeah, well, because The Mask of Mirrors was originally scheduled to come out November of last year, and it wound up getting postponed to January. So it's the second book is coming out a year after the first one was supposed to.
Got it. But
only 10 months for you guys.
We'll get 2 in a year.
Yep.
Yeah. That's always super cool. Well,
and yes, I will say, if you guys, because I just saw a comment of I need this pattern deck. If you want the pattern deck to happen, then spread the word. Like, tell people about the books, because the more readers we have and the more people we have who are excited about the story, the more likely it is that we'll actually get the kind of support that we need to fund something as expensive as a deck. So spread the word.
That's my plan. I'm gonna tell all my customers, like, read this book and then go kickstart the pattern deck so that I can get it. Thank you.
I feel like you guys live in a city where there would be people who are interested in that kind of thing.
I think so too, for sure. So yes, thank you to everyone for watching. We need to give out a secret password for people to enter to win the astrological charts. I saw a lot of interest in the astrological charts. So what secret password do y'all want to use?
They have
to enter it in Google Form to prove they were watching this.
What did you say, Alyc?
Thread works, or pattern.
Love it.
Let's say thread.
Thread.
Yeah.
Thread is the secret password. So if you want to enter, I did drop the link to the Google form to enter into that, but I will drop it again. So go to that Google form, and really you just need to put in your name and email so we can send it to you if you win a day. Hey, is that Cat?
That's Vodka.
Oh, that's Vodka. I didn't see which cat.
Sent away the kitty cat.
She'll be back.
Sorry, cats are.
I was gonna say mine's chopped liver because she sees him all the time.
Well, you keep dumping him off the desk.
For the pattern deck, or not for the pattern deck, for the astrological chart, we would need and it doesn't have to be your birth date. You can be any date, and it'll just be what's auspicious for you on that day. But a date, a time of day, either daytime or nighttime, because that actually matters, and a year. So month, day, year, time of day.
And email. I saw the question there of, who would your dream artist be for the pattern deck? To be clear, we don't actually have one. Our plan is to do an open call for artists who are interested to basically send us their portfolio and their bid for how much they would charge to do the deck. And then we'll go from there, because we haven't really decided what Versenian art looks like. So it's going to look like whatever the artist we choose does.
we kind of would want something that looks more on the hand painted or wood block kind of printed side of things. So it looks like it's been created in the setting, but
as opposed to a really digital look or whatever. But so we don't know.
Cool. So yes, all of the questions are there in the Google Doc. It'll ask you for a date and a time. So just make sure that you fill out. It's 4 questions. So if you want one of the astrological charts, go and fill that out, and we'll essentially pick 3 people from that. And I will send those names to Alyc, and they will make a chart for you. And also, of course, if you have not already read this book, please read it and buy it. That's why we're all here.
I was gonna say, and I think you have signature plates, right? We sent those to you.
I don't think we have mailed them yet, but we will have book plates. Need to get those sent out.
Cool.
And they're really pretty. They're actually,
So
they
pretty.
use the image from the cover, sort of like at the bottom of the book plate. So they're really fancy looking.
Nice.
Fancy. And you can't get that from Amazon.
No.
So please order the book. Just go to chubbyandcruise.com, place an order. This book is on there since it's one of our events. So you just like click it. Again, it's just a Google form. You click it and you put your name in there, and we'll give you a book. So it's pretty easy to do. So definitely do that, and we will have signed book plates, and we'll have a limited number of those. So make sure that you get one. And thank y'all so much. This conversation was so interesting. I'm very glad that y'all came and did this. Thank y'all.
Thank you for hosting it, and thank you for reaching out to us. That was really great. Yeah.
Yeah, I hate Twitter, and I also love Twitter. I have a very love-hate relationship with Twitter, but it is how this event came about, so I'm grateful for it for this. So thank you to everyone who is watching now or later. Even if you're watching later, you can still buy a book, hopefully. So this will live on our YouTube channel, so y'all can check it out there as well, / share it if you thought this was interesting to other people. And please share this book widely so that we can all get the pattern deck that we want.
You have no idea how badly I want it. Like, I'm the one who's been laying patterns this whole time, and I'm like, I'm just using these ugly plain cards that I've put on Sharpie.
I think they're from like extras from my Are they not the extra card?
The original set was that from the game Slash, like they gave you blank cards that you could write additional characters onto. So the very first version of it was that. Then I bought some plain playing
Okay.
cards.
Yes, please get us all the pattern deck we deserve. And thank you all so much. Thank you everyone for watching. And please join us tomorrow. We will have author Tom Purdom to talk about I Want the Stars, which is a book that came out in the 60s, actually, that just got reprinted. But it was one of the first science fiction books to have a protagonist of color. And so we'll be talking to him tomorrow. So that should be an interesting conversation as well. Join us for that at 6 p.m. Central tomorrow. And we will see y'all. Thank y'all again for watching. And thank y'all for coming and talking to us.